Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast, the show where Papa Tom spreads wisdom like a smear of cream cheese on an everything bagel. Here's your host, Tom Jennings.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bagel Logic Podcast. I am your host, Tom Jennings, and this week it's just me. I got a great guest coming up next week, Jess Marciano, and it's one I've been looking forward to. We've had it on the schedule for a while. I'm not trying to curse it. I had some some no-shows throughout the course of the Bagel Logic Podcast, but I'm pretty confident that Jess will be here. Maybe she's even listening right now. So, Jess, be here if I post this before we record. This week, a few topics I wanted to touch on, 3 to be exact, and all related to podcasting. I did an episode. Yes, man, they all kind of blur together at this point. There was an episode entitled Podcast About Podcasts, and I'll be referring to some stuff that has come up on that. You see, when you do the P's, sometimes they pop. You have this little pop filter that's on your microphone, but sometimes it doesn't work. So this week, just some weird stuff that has come up, and I don't know if I should start from pithy and move to more serious, because I feel like sometimes serious is better and more engaging. So, but then again, I can make you wait for the serious stuff. But I'll intro the 3 different topics that I'll be talking about today in terms of just situations related to the podcast that came up that are frustrating, annoying, sad, whatever you want to call them. I'll be touching on 3 different things. One is just an incident that happened about a week ago at a public event related to a person who was a guest on the podcast and got upset with me. And second one being a case of theft of intellectual property. Sounds pretty credible, doesn't it? Exciting. Theft of intellectual property. And then the final one has to do with the Greg Fickus murder, which I discussed on the podcast about podcasts. Not that long ago, somebody even commented on that episode that they had appreciated that I'd brought that back up. But I'll give you an update on the status of that in terms of, well, what you may or may not have known is that I did have the intention of starting a podcast specifically dedicated to the murder of Greg Fickus, and there's some complications that came up with regard to that. So I'll discuss that as the third and final thing after I get rid of the trivial stuff, because the third one's pretty heavy. So first one, it's weird. Here I was. We had a recording. It was a live recording, remote in Medina at a farmer's market where I sell bagels. And Medina, New York is near Buffalo. And sometimes I forget that there are people that listen, at least according to the statistics, that don't necessarily live in the region and know or have the familiarity of a place like Medina that I do. But whatever the case, we did this remote, and various people grabbed the microphone. I think there were 6, 7, 8. I don't even know, however many. And at one point, there was a section of the discussion that I had to edit out, and it was really just some stuff that got a little bawdy. And in listening back to it, I thought it seemed a bit sophomoric. Could possibly be misinterpreted as misogynistic. The reality is that, I hate to use the term locker room talk, because I think locker room talk is often a term that people use to justify talking dirty. I talk dirty sometimes. I do. I'm not, I am conscientious of my dirty talk not being overtly misogynistic. I think that I don't want to say I think. That's my little catch this week. Sometimes you go, sometimes you go, other times you go, I think. If you ever want to get rid of those little things, just be aware of them. And I'm aware I'm saying that too often. So I'll try to pull that one out. I'm really conscientious of coming off as degrading to women or appearing misogynistic. Yeah, I'm human. And things come up of a sexual nature that could be misinterpreted a certain way. Either way, it's the type of humor that's not necessarily meant for public consumption. I did do stand-up comedy for a little while. Did I tell some dirty jokes? I did. None of which I would necessarily consider to be misogynistic. But again, those are the types of things you have to be very, very, very conscientious of, especially when you're in a public place. You never know if somebody's recording you. As a teacher, I'm not necessarily, I don't want to pretend that I'm some kind of public figure. I'm not, but I do write a newspaper column. And there was a story in the news recently that a fellow columnist for the same newspaper that I write for was terminated because he made some degrading comments about women. So I made the decision to remove a section of the conversation. And, honestly, I don't know if it really would have been taken all that offensively in terms of degrading towards women or misogynistic or whatever. I think people would have heard it and just gone, "Oh my God, you're being an idiot." But we were discussing this at a public event, myself and a couple other people, and the person who was with us, myself and Josh, in the conversation where we were discussing some of these topics. His wife was present, and so later on in the evening, he comes up to me, and we were at an event celebrating a bar that I used to work at, and this gentleman is, I gotta say, he's got to be at least 64, maybe 65. I don't know. I'm 56, just for context. And so my son comes in the bar, and this gentleman's up at the bar. He's with the guest of honor, the guy that's having his launch party for his beverages and all that. And he just says, "I need to speak to you." Now, my initial thought is, well, hey, maybe this guy wants to talk to me about investing in my bagel business, or maybe he's having a surprise party for his wife. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is how oblivious I am to the fact that he was somehow offended. So he gets nose to nose with me at this event, and he says, "If you got something to say to me, you say it to my face." Now, the reason I mention our ages is because who says that? Who says that? It's just ludicrous. And I honestly didn't know what had been said to him. And he said that his wife said that I was saying things that were disparaging. And I said, "Listen, there were other people there. You don't have to take my word for it. There are other people that can vouch for what I said and the nature of the conversation. Nobody was saying anything terrible about you." And it went on. It went on later. I got home. There was a whole slew of social media messages. We went back and forth. And this gentleman and his wife were longtime customers at the bar that I used to work at. So that's the nature of our relationship. And his wife I'd known even longer. She was a trainer at a job that I worked at back in, gotta be 2007. And I'd worked with their daughter at another place in, early 2001, 2002. So I have a history with the family. And this gentleman, I used to do a running event. He had a huge tent that he would loan us every year, saving us hundreds of dollars for the event. So we have a history, and to that point, there was nothing at all negative about it. So on some level, I struggle when situations like that happen. And as I've gotten older, I've erred on the side of cutting off people like that. Because my thought process in this case is, if this person doesn't value our relationship enough to have an honest discussion with me, or even present whatever the situation was in a way that was semi-respectful, then I don't want to be a part of it. Now, there was as I was walking my dog, I had this sort of secondary criteria that I guess I've created. Maybe it's an imaginary secondary criteria, but I think it's a valid one. And I mentioned that he contacted me on social media, and it's that's where I was walking down, and I says, the reason he had to contact me on social media is because he doesn't have my phone number. So we're not like friends per se, because I feel like if you're not to the point where you've at least exchanged phone numbers over some point. Now, there are people that are friends of friends. So, for example, if you needed my phone number and maybe you didn't have it, but we were acquaintances, you might go to my friend, my buddy Jack Burris, for example, who I haven't mentioned in a podcast in a while, but I should because I love you, Jack, and hopefully you're listening. And if somebody said to Jack, they go, "Hey, Jack, could you give me Tom Jennings' number?" He would use judgment and say, whatever, probably give it to him. And I'm pretty sure he has. And I'm okay with that. But whoever that person that's calling me, it's not someone that I gave my number. But they've at least wound up in my contact database at some point in case there was something that came up where I needed to reach out to them. And I do things like, this isn't me trying to tell you what a wonderful person I am. It's really more of a selfish thing. But if someone's parent passes away and we have any kind of relationship, I try to reach out to those people because I know when my parents died that it really meant a lot to me. Not only that the people that I expected to call and offer sympathy, in some ways when you call somebody that doesn't expect to receive a call and is sympathetic, it's really a beautiful thing. And I like the feeling of being able to do something that doesn't cost me money, doesn't cost me a lot of time, but it's a good gesture. And, to get off the bunny trail back to that situation. So, yeah, I cut them both off. If you get to the point where you're willing to ruin somebody's good time because you somehow have been, the expression my son uses is butthurt, then I don't know why I should feel bad about it, and I do. Trust me, I do. I don't want to, but I do feel bad about the situation. But the fact that I do feel bad, I don't want to deal with it anymore. I don't want to have to apologize. I don't want to have to revisit it. Will this person be around at places that I've been at? Probably. But I don't care. I blocked them both on social media, the husband and the wife. If I see them, at best, I'll be cordial. Annoying, at best. But a learning experience, nonetheless. So, too, now we'll get to the second topic that I was fairly succinct in that. That's pretty good for me. Second topic is the theft of intellectual property. I'll preface this with a story from, it's got to be, if I've been married 14 years, this is probably, 12 years ago. So for about the last 15, maybe 17 years or so, I've been doing freelance writing. And part of the freelance writing is to write concert reviews. And I had an opportunity to go see Paul McCartney for the first time in Toronto back in 2008, 2009. I'm not entirely sure of the year because, time is flying by. And I wrote this really heartfelt review. It was just such a great experience. And about 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, a guy sends an email to me and says, just an FYI, there's a guy who wrote a review of Paul McCartney, and it looks like he just copied and pasted yours and changed the introduction. So, needless to say, that's my catchphrase of the day, evidently. I was pretty upset. I was very upset. And I did have some recourse. He was using a blog platform. I'm not sure what it was. It was a popular one at the time. For the life of me, And I just saw a Prevagen commercial. I feel like I should start taking it so I can start remembering stuff better. But whatever the blogging format was, it may have even been Blogger. We'll just say it was something similar if it was not that. You could file a what is now called like a takedown order. So you could say, hey, look, this person has stolen my content. It needs to be removed. And the blogger, the platform administrators will review it and hopefully take action. And they did. So now in that case, there was really not a lot of harm. I didn't get paid for the review. It was, I got like a free ticket to Paul McCartney for writing a concert review. Folks, it's a good gig. Free concert tickets these days, $150, $200. It bums me out that I don't get paid for more of the things that I write or the things that I do. But that's some pretty cool compensation. And I wouldn't be able to see 1/10 of the shows that I see if I weren't allowed to, given the opportunity to review them. And I get paid for almost everything now. I did kind of draw a hard line in terms of, and I think I did a whole podcast. So there you go. I did a whole podcast on getting paid for your work. So my sister and I did a podcast called Cover Your Assets, the Labor and Employment Law Podcast. Man, we never came up with another name that was shorter and better. But there it is. If you get the chance to listen to it, it's real. I think it's really well done. It's very, very professionally done. It is. I don't think it. And I keep saying that. If you're in a drinking game and just drink every time I say I think, you're going to be intoxicated by the end of the podcast. It is really well done. My sister is wonderful. My sister and I, we were apart for many years through no fault of our own. I mean, she had a conflict with my parents, and I somehow was lumped into that, so we didn't have any kind of contact for a lot of years. And in recent years, we've developed a very close relationship and this wonderful rapport. So we have good rapport. She's brilliant. So the content is good. I have a slew of stories of the many jobs that I've had over my life. So there's the kind of human element of it. So here you have attorney, expert, goofy podcaster guy, storyteller, Gabby guy, whatever you want to call me. And so she was working for this law firm in Atlanta, and she also had a blog that at some point their webmaster was copying the articles and putting it into the website and presenting them as the firm's material. And the reason that people do that, in case you don't know, if you're not into digital marketing, when you type into Google and you go employment law attorneys, Georgia, Google crawls websites and they look for what's called relevant content. So content marketers will either create or look for or subcontract for articles related to whatever business you're in. My buddy Jack Burris, he cleans rugs, carpet cleaning. In his case, he has a great business. But if he wanted to maybe expand his business and didn't want to pay Google for ad specific stuff related to carpet cleaning, he'd have to start writing a bunch of articles related to cleaning carpets. Now that's kind of a tough thing to do because there's only so much you can write about cleaning carpets. Whereas when it comes to labor and employment law, there is a myriad of topics. What a great word that is. I may have used it already in this podcast. But the problem comes when you're looking for content for an attorney's website, you've got one of two options. Now, if you're going to pay somebody to write that content for the website, it's going to cost you some money because legal stuff, people that write about the law, typically the people that write about the law are lawyers or they're paralegals that have stuff reviewed. And you'll always see the little thing, this does not represent an attorney-client relationship, blah, blah, blah. Now, in the case of the podcast, my hope was for that secondary podcast is that here we have my labor of love, Bagel Logic, and there I had this uber professional Cover Your Assets, and I have a couple of music podcasts that I do as well, and other ideas that I've had for podcasts. But at some point, I'd like to be a professional podcaster, somebody that gets paid money, cash. Man, if I could do this full time, I'd love it. And I've toyed with ideas in terms of, and I've just started placing ads in here, which, may not result in a lot of money. But I've toyed with, trying to seek out sponsorships, some ways to monetize the content. It's a lot of work, and there's some luck involved. There's luck involved. It's like anything. One day, a bunch of people discover you and they go, wow, the Bagel Logic podcast is great. That's why, now I don't know if you grew up with public television, they used to do these drives and they would just hound you like, please send us money. And you'll hear in podcasts, I'm going to go like, oh, please subscribe, please share with your friends, do all that stuff. And I'm not good at that. I should do more of that in the podcast. I should be more of a shameless self-promoter throughout the podcast. So if you haven't done so, please share, invite your friends to listen. So here's, I'm getting worked up. That's what it is. So anyhow, my sister leaves the law firm back in November. And this web guy had been taking her content while she was working at the law firm and using that. And he had put some links to our podcast. You put a link to a podcast of mine. Yeah, I'm okay with that. There's no problem there. And I obsess over statistics of all my podcasts. I noticed that one had a bit of a spike in listenership, and I was just like, "What the heck's going on here?" And sure enough, I go back to the law website because it showed that as one of the sources of the spikes, and he had generated transcripts of all of my podcasts, 28 episodes, and he had put it into the firm's site for SEO, search engine optimization, and content marketing purposes. Now, this guy's making $108,000 by his own admission per year as a content marketer, and right in the show notes for that particular show, because I was looking to monetize it and hopefully get a sponsor at some point as the beginning of my great podcast network. It says, hey, don't use this stuff. I'm paraphrasing. Don't use my stuff without my permission. Don't create derivative works, which means you're just, and he did. The transcripts are a derivative work, and he gave me no credit anywhere in terms of being the person that created it. He just gave all credit to my sister, because she's the attorney, and he used all of these podcast transcripts so he could build the firm and make decent money. So he stole my work. Now, the Paul McCartney guy, I'm actually being pretty good at getting back to all the relevance, tying this stuff together. The Paul McCartney guy, he was just lazy, going, I want content on my blog because it's my hobby blog. Annoying, yeah. Then he had to take it down. This guy, he's making money. So I fire off an email, strongly worded email. And I didn't go up to him in a bar and go, you and I need to talk, mister. Maybe that's what I should. Maybe it would have been a better approach. And it's like, dude, you ripped off my content. You're a freelance web guy, content marketer. You know what this stuff costs to generate. And you grabbed it without my permission. And his reply was, your sister gave permission for us to use it. And I was like, well, it's interesting that my sister gave you permission to generate transcripts a month after she left the firm. I said, can you provide any proof to that? And he said, take it up with the law firm. So now I'm stuck. I really, these, and here's what, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Here's what really pisses me off is I feel violated. I feel violated like somebody stole a bunch of stuff out of my car. Okay? You know what I mean? Like, it's not like somebody rifles through your car and they steal the change and maybe your iPod or your iPad or some other stuff that has some value. You're annoyed. And part of the annoyance comes in like, you know what? This person is probably never going to have any consequences for the crappy thing that they've done to me. And this is a really crappy thing that this guy has done to me. And I honestly, his answer was so flip. I'm getting into this obsessive phase where I'm researching what my legal recourse is. And man, I just want to sue him. But, our legal system is not set up for guys like me. It's not. You got to have money to fight these people. And they know it. It's like some of these kids that I have to teach, and I don't say have to teach in like a burden sense. It's like the kids that I work with, which is a better way to phrase it, that are exploited and abused because they know that they don't have the means to stop it, because they may not have a parent, and they may not have a parent with money that's in the picture. So they abuse them, and they think I'll never go to jail for it because I only abuse people that I know aren't going to do anything about it. And that's what I feel like this scumbag did to me. And I don't want to just walk away from it and accept that. It's hard. It's hard to accept something like that. And if anything else happens, I'll bring you up to date, if you care. And that leads me to another thing that I don't want to accept. And this is the Greg Fickus situation. And it makes the other two situations seem insignificant. So, if you haven't listened to the episode, or you don't plan on listening to the episode, back in 1993, I was working at a place called Friendly's, and there was this young man, 19 years old. He was attending the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, one of the best schools around. His name was Greg Fickus. I worked with his brother, Steve Fickus. His older brother was an assistant manager at Friendly's that I managed. And Steve and I were really close. Steve was a really good guy. I don't know why this happens, but I'm not a really good guy sometimes. Like I swear a lot. I can be uncouth. I don't shower as often as I should. I'm not always like civilized in the view of some people. And Steve was just like one of these guys. He came from a really nice family, didn't swear, just a sweet guy. And when I was around Steve, I could be that way as well. I felt comfortable being that way. There are people that I'm comfortable being around, when people say, oh, you're not authentic. When I was around Steve, for whatever reason, if I knew it upset him, I just didn't swear. But I didn't feel like, it wasn't the mentality like, oh, Steve is here, so I guess I can't swear because he's square and all those types of things. It was more like, I really like Steve. And even though he and I are very different people, he's like this really good guy. And I'm like this complex, fractured guy. He made me feel less fractured. And I didn't do things because I felt obligated to. I did things or watched what I was saying because I felt obligated to do so. I feel like there's some people that I do maybe swear or say things around that I probably shouldn't, but I also know that they understand who I am and they understand my heart and they don't see that as offensive. And honestly, if I offend somebody, I'm the first one to try to make amends and admit it. I am. Now we go back to that first situation we talked about in the podcast. Hey man, if I did something wrong, I'd be happy to admit it. But if you're going to keep coming at me, I don't want to keep beating myself up. I never had to beat myself up around Steve. So I was charged with running an ice cream cooler out to an event for a charity called Camp Good Days and Special Times. And Steve says, oh, my brother's got a pickup truck and he works at the other Friendly's, which was a restaurant chain that served ice cream and other things. So went over to the restaurant that morning. I met Greg. We made arrangements. He was going to drop the ice cream cooler off. And next morning comes, I drive to this place, which was a long drive, and he's a no-show. And my attitude is, here's going to be my potty mouth. What the fuck? Where is this guy? I mean, I'm angry. I'm indignant. I'm upset. And So, you got this ice cream product. I don't have a cooler. This was one that we were able to plug in with a generator or something, and it was going to keep the product in better shape. And so because this guy doesn't show up, now here I look like an idiot. He made me look bad. And I think all of those are very natural emotions. Well, it turned out that the evening before, he had been brutally beaten in the middle of the city of Rochester. And so when I find, this is the day before cell phones, so it's not like I could get any kind of update or anything. And when I got back to the store, they were like, oh, did you ever happen to Greg? And I'm like, no. They said, oh, we got, attacked last night in the city of Rochester. I'm like, oh, he got beat up, hopefully it's not that bad. Oh, he's in the hospital, we really don't know what the condition is. So at that point, I'm like, oh, man, don't I feel like an idiot? This poor kid didn't show up because he got beat up. And then later that evening, right before I went home, I stopped next door to have a drink with a coworker who worked at the store that he worked at. And she told me that he had died of the injuries. He was brutally beaten, as I came to learn later. And then I felt even worse and attended the funeral, be with Steve, because Steve and I were very close at the time. And I guess going back, man, it's so weird how some of this is all interconnected. When Greg died, I reached out to Steve and I just was like, dude, I'm so sorry. Like, what do you say to somebody who's lost their 19-year-old brother that's been murdered in what, by every account, was just a random act of violence? And it haunted me. Greg showed up at Steve, I'm sorry. Greg is the one who passed away. Steve showed up one day, I asked him if he wanted to go out so he could get his mind off of things. And he showed up with his brother's truck for some reason. And it still had all this like carbon stuff on it. And it looked really dirty. And I said, what's up? And he said, oh, we just got this back. The reason I'm driving this is because I just picked it up from the police department. This is where they dusted for fingerprints. And I was like, damn, dude. I'm like, you want to talk about it? We talked about it. And, a lot of people were really devastated. I got to meet his parents, and man, it was just awful. And about 4 or 5 months later, this is a story I've probably never told, and probably should never tell, but I will, because I'm not the bad guy in this situation. My ex-wife and I were separated and on the road to divorce, and we had a small child. My son Trevor was only 3 months old. She was having an affair with a guy. And I was living with my parents, and I went to the house to pick up some stuff because we were splitting up. Now, this is the dumb thing I did. I brought a waitress with me that I worked with, who was an incredibly attractive woman, to get her jealous. It worked a little bit too well. She physically beat me up pretty good. And to get her off me, I pinned her and I left. So she went to the police. She reported it as me assaulting her. And she got to them first. So even though I had physical injuries all over my face, she was able to file a police report. And I think 1993, maybe the court system was a little more jaded in terms of male versus female domestic violence. So they came and arrested me. And I'm out of the blue. I'm hanging out at my parents' house. I can knock on the door. Oh, by the way, I got a warrant for your arrest. They arrest me, cuff me, and they drag me down to Monroe County Jail. And I was like, man, this is a horrible place. Horrible. So they throw me in a cell. I'm with about 20 guys. Strip search you, open up your rectum, the whole night. It's a horrible experience. I don't recommend getting arrested or having to go to jail. So I was there, and the following morning, my old neighbor was the jail sergeant, and he saw me there, and he was like, "What are you doing here?" And I says, "Well, he's like, he knew what was going on with the affair and everything." So he got me an attorney. I wound up getting out pretty quick, and eventually they dropped the charges. That is definitely a story for another day because it's an important one. Because I refused to cop a plea because I didn't do anything, and eventually they dropped the case. But while I was in jail, Sarkis was telling me, Sergeant Sarkis, who was my neighbor, that there was this guy that was in there that he knew that he was the one that committed, was one of the two men that attacked and killed Greg Fickus. And I remember hearing him yelling at the guy, and he's like, "Yeah, you're the one that did the Fickus kid. You're the one that did the Fickus kid." And this guy was like, "No, I wasn't." He just had an attitude. It was a little guy, I remember. And he and I got released at the same time for whatever reason. I don't even know what he was in for. And I used to see him all the time for about a year. And he always looked nervous. So that bothered me. And then years later, when I graduated college, the keynote speaker, and this is 2006. Keynote speaker was a guy named Michael Fickus, and I said to him after the ceremony, I go, "You in relation to Steve?" Yeah, it's my brother. I said, "Oh, so you were Greg's brother too?" Yeah. I was like, man. And this case it's been a cold case for a long time. So, Josh, who was with me at the farmer's market there, I actually approached him and said, I really like our chemistry. And I was thinking maybe we could do the podcast I really wanted to do about the Fickus murder, because podcasts have a way of solving these crimes. You put them back up into the public eye and things happen. And there's a lot of things that are really challenging, because I'm not an investigative reporter. I don't have a police background. So I don't want to come at this thing like, "Oh, look at me. I'm Tom Jennings. I'm amateur detective going to solve the 30-year-old cold case of Greg Fickus." That wasn't my intent. But it was nagging at me because I knew the 30th anniversary was coming up and there were witnesses to the crime. I just didn't get. And, in working with the population of kids that I do, I know this snitch mentality. There are people that will cover for other people. They just will. It doesn't matter. And that drives me nuts because so many crimes go unsolved just because there's this anti-snitch thing. I remember I had a student who once made a brilliant statement. She goes, "I don't snitch. I state the obvious. Just tell them the truth. Tell them the truth is not snitching. Snitches is when you're telling on your little brother for taking an extra cookie. Okay? That's not a big deal. That's snitchy. That's malintent. If somebody's murdered and you witness it and you, at least on some level, feel safe enough that you're not going to have some kind of retaliation against. And again, I get that part, man. If you're scared, I get it. But if you ain't snitching because, man, I don't snitch, that's messed up. And that's how I've always felt about this case. So I stumbled across an article recently. So after that, I'd done this podcast about podcast episodes and mentioned the Fickus murder. And the Rochester Police Department had created a cold case unit. I thought to myself, wow, this is really cool. And they have all the cold case listed up there and pertinent documentation and things like that. And sure enough, there was the Greg Fickus page. I thought, wow, that's cool. They're looking into these cold cases. So sent an email off to the website through the website, just said, "Hey, I'm a podcaster. I'm thinking about doing a podcast about this Fickus murder. And I want to know if I can review the files or maybe look at some stuff related to it." And about a week later, I get an email from somebody that says, "Hey, I'm really glad you're interested in this case. So let's talk about it." And we went back and forth for a couple of weeks. And then finally the investigator said, "Hey, give me a call." So I did. I told him everything I just told you beforehand. And except for the Tom Sarkis stuff. I just didn't get into that. I was hoping to get into that later. I just never shared that with him. And so the sergeant and I had this just great conversation. I was really, really feeling hopeful. And I explained to him, I go, I'm not trying to exploit this situation. It's something that's bothered me. And I've listened to a lot of podcasts, especially true crime podcasts, that have resulted in long-time cold cases being solved. And my hope is to increase some awareness, stoke some memories, do something to get this case back in the news. And at that point, I approached Josh, said, hey, will you do this with me? Will you be my guy? Maybe just somebody that I can be you can be a sounding board for me throughout the podcast. So it's not just me like I'm doing today, just hanging out and rambling for an hour, which some people listen to. And I appreciate that. God bless you. I really do. It means a lot to me, or I just wouldn't do this anymore. If nobody listened, why am I wasting my time? So it's like, here I am. I'm feeling encouraged. I'm almost feeling like it's destined to happen. And here in Buffalo around this time, just to give you some sense of time and place where I'm at when I'm recording this, we had that player in Buffalo, Damar Hamlin, who had this cardiac episode on the field. And, we all thought he was going to die or at least be paralyzed or horrible things were going to happen. And everybody came together and prayed. And, the guy, within a week, he's recovered to a level that nobody could have imagined when they saw the episode happen. And so it renews your faith, your power in the energy of that humans can give to a situation. Whether you want to call that God, whether you want to call that anything, I don't know. That's where I always, some people, they tell me they're atheists. I'm like, God, how? There's times where I go, man, how can you be an atheist when you see things like that that are just so miraculous? And I've had a lot of miracles in my life as well, in terms of family members that were, given 18 months to live and are lived well past that and all that. And, I cling to some of that stuff, but unfortunately there's times where stuff just doesn't work out. My mom, nobody prayed harder for that woman to live longer than me. Nobody. And she died. I don't know if 1 million people had prayed for her, would she have lived longer? I don't know. I wish I could have found out. So you get in your head like, oh, it's destiny. It's all going to happen. And then you get disappointed. So the original investigator and the guy that originally contacted me that's in charge of the cold case, and we had a conference call. Oh, today is January 11th. So it was the 9th, a couple days ago. And we talked for probably an hour. I didn't record the conversation, which is weird because I record every conversation that I feel is going to be of value in terms of remembering or just to stash it away. And I had my recorder. I'd said to them up front, I said, I'm doing a podcast. I'd like to set up a time we could talk, and I'm going to record the conversation. And then I didn't record it. So I don't know. Anyhow, they went over all the details, everything they knew up to this point. And there's things I can't reveal, certainly in a podcast. But I will tell you this, because I think this is stuff that maybe is known or is not damaging or whatever. The investigator said, look, we know who did this. We just can't prove it. Because unfortunately, when this crime happened, there's no DNA. There's no witnesses that can identify the perps, which is a fancy word for perpetrator. There was one person who fingered these guys, but they're either dead or even when we last spoke to them, they were so mentally ill and so incoherent. There was no way that we could bring charges based on the eyewitness testimony and this person who identified these two people. It's my dog. My wife yelling at my dog. All right. And then he just basically said, and then the two people that we know did it, they're related, so they're not going to talk. So the only thing the guy said is he says, and this kind of hit home because I agreed with him to some level. He said, the only thing your podcast is going to do is get a bunch of people coming out of the woodwork saying, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do this? And get a bunch of lunatics that are going to come out and say, this, and this. If we get to the point where these guys are going to confess, which I don't think is going to happen because they lawyered up, then we can get them. But it's not going to happen. This case is not going to be solved. It's not solvable, and there's nothing you can do to change that. Yeah. So here's where I'm at 2 days later, right now. This is my mental state when it comes to this conversation. The first night I lost a lot of sleep. I lost a lot of sleep last night too, just kind of tossing and turning and thinking, what the fuck, man? Like, why is this situation what it is? Like, how do you kill somebody in the middle of a busy city street with a whole bunch of people driving by and get away with it? Like, how is that possible? This isn't some kind of cold and calculated, plotted, This is a street crime. These are thugs that killed a dude. Like, it's a truly random act of violence. And, one of the things that the officer said to me, he said that they're, the suspects, the people that drove by couldn't identify the specific characteristics, or they wouldn't have been able to identify the perpetrators in a lineup, but they did know that they were African American. And the officer said, well, there may have been a racial slur involved. And I'm like, yeah, that didn't happen. There's no way. And you may be saying to yourself, oh, you met this guy once. I met his parents. I met all his friends. I worked with his brother. Anybody, you know what? If the people that use racial slurs on a regular basis, they use them. We all know them. We all know we use them. We're not surprised that they use them. It's part of their character. It's, like when somebody goes, oh, such and such said a racial slur. There's going to be one of two reactions. You're either going to go, yeah, I can see that. Or you're going to go, yeah, there's no way. And I'm telling you, in this case, there's no way. I don't think this was a racially motivated incident at all. I think it was just a random act of violence for whatever reason. But, there again lies the problem. We just don't know because there's not enough information. And I guess my hope was kind of like, and he goes, the police officer says, and he's a well-meaning guy. Let me tell you, both these guys, I admire police officers, the work they do, and I thank them for the work that they do. Totally pro police officer. I've dealt with some real assholes that were police officers, but it's like any profession. You get these fringe idiots and people that are rotten, but it's not a reflection on the profession as a whole. Most guys, especially guys like this that are detectives, I think it bothers me. Man, it's their job to solve these crimes. How do you think they feel when they can't solve it? Because they gotta be around the families and all that stuff. And I could hear the pain in this guy's voice that he was the original investigator. He was so frustrated that he was so close to having these guys and just didn't get them. And I was like, well, maybe he says, like, back to, went off on a tangent. He says, it's not like the movies, kid. It's not like these guys they're not like you and me. They're not going to have a conscience and just come in and confess because somebody starts a podcast. And they're not the kind of people that listen to podcasts anyway. I said, no, that's not my intent. I said, my intent is to increase the profile and get people talking about it again. And maybe they said something to a girlfriend or, whatever. And he's like, yeah, it's not going to happen. Kid, this case is just unsolvable. And he spoke in absolute terms. And I'm having a hard time accepting that. I can't imagine what his parents are feeling. I mean, they're people of deep faith. They, what? They have that. They have that. They at least can say, well, God, I trust you and your reasoning behind all this and why it is the way it is. And I still love you, God. I have conversations with God where sometimes I go, dude, what's the deal with this? Like, how are we able to help a football player, but we can't figure out a murder that was in public? Like, what do you do? Do you pick and choose God? Is that how it is? And this isn't meant to be any kind of anti-religious sentiment. I think it's just a genuine conflict that I'm sure a lot of people have when it comes to their relationship with God, with if it's Jesus who you believe in, if it's, I don't know, I don't understand Buddhism or any of those other faiths enough to maybe know what their philosophy is. People of deep faith, they have faith. They, even in situations that look to me like, wow, it's pretty messed up, they're the people that go, you know what? I trust what's happening. I struggle with that. I do. I struggle with that a lot. I struggle with it. Why do you do, the old thing? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why don't bad things happen to some bad people? I don't mean to be a vengeful jerk sometimes, but I'm maybe that's a part of me. That's a part of me that I always have to be very conscientious of. Man, I wish karma would come, and man, I wish something bad would happen to him. That guy stole my intellectual property. I hope something bad happens to him. I hope he loses all of his jobs, which is pretty horrible. I've lost jobs. Why would I want anybody to lose their jobs? But yeah, that's I don't know. That's intense. I think the reason that I began with the two other situations is because I had to work up to this. I had to work up to the point where I could talk about it in a way that was not just raw emotion. And there is raw emotion in this. It doesn't get much rawer than this particular subject. And, it sucks. It just absolutely sucks. And it brings me back to, this is the thing I'll wrap up with, a good friend of mine, someone I was close to, Megan Dix. I mean, she was random act of violence, shot in the head, and I wrote her obituary. I went over to the family, experienced and absorbed all of the grief with them. And I was with them when the police came and said, we know who did it and we're going to get him. But I was also with them before that too, when everything was uncertain. And to see the damage on the family after the murder, and especially in that time of unknowing, like, what happened? Who did this? Well, why? Where's the, quote unquote reasoning behind this? And I went back to the whole ficus thing at the time, and I thought, oh Lord, please don't let this one get away, please. And they got the woman who did it. And just because of circumstances that would take somewhat too long to explain, they wound up not having to go to trial. And to me, that was just such a blessing, because, man, I just would not want that family to be traumatized by having to go through and rehash everything that happened to Megan. And that was the best thing that could happen in a horrible, horrible situation. Fickus family, they just live with uncertainty. And again, this may bother me more than them. I don't know. I don't see how it could. I mean, I don't see how they're not just as upset about it. But I don't know. And then I have that debate with myself, like, I should just go ahead and do the podcast anyway. The heck with that old codger. What does he know about this case just because he investigated it? Nothing is unsolvable. And I brought up a case that had when I was a kid. There was a woman who was murdered by an axe murderer. Her head was in. I said, well, they captured the axe murderer after 40 years. He goes, there was evidence in that case. So, hey, look, everything the guy said was true. It was true, but as they said, there's no evidence in this case. There's no DNA. There's no reliable eyewitnesses. There's no nothing. And he says, we got a few questions we can ask that are in our pocket that only the perpetrator would know. But that's it. And, it's weird because they were very forthcoming. They gave me a lot of information. They were very trusting in me. And I hope I haven't betrayed that trust. Nothing I've said today was anything that I was told I couldn't tell you. There were things that I was specifically told not to discuss with anyone, and I didn't discuss those here. I haven't discussed them with anyone. But I don't know if I feel better in knowing what I know. So, yeah, that's going to wrap it up, I guess. That's going to wrap it up. So, I don't know. If you've listened, if you've managed to listen this far, I appreciate you. If you haven't, hey, I got it all off my chest, man. My chest is breathing a little bit easier. But I still got some work to do on this one. I still got some stuff to process. And I hope you can relate to that. I mean, sometimes I know there's days where I feel really, really lonely in my thoughts and in my thought process. And I think I'm the only jerk who thinks this way. And I'm the only jerk who treats people this way. I'm the only idiot that, unfriends somebody and blocks them on Facebook because, they said a few words to me at a public event. I'm the only one that gets, upset about a murder from 30 years ago, a guy I met once for 15 minutes. I don't know. I feel like other people sometimes can relate to the way I think. I hope so. But that's it for today. Bagel Logic Podcast. Next week, we got a guest, so you won't have to listen to me ramble. You'll actually get some banter. Jess is super intelligent, so I'm excited for that episode. And that's going to be it. Thanks for listening. This is your host, Tom Jennings, with a professional outro. We'll see you next time.